My name is Ella. I'm 32 years old, and I'm sitting in a courtroom watching my own parents try to destroy me. Across the aisle, they sit with their expensive lawyer demanding every single thing they ever gave me since birth. My hands are shaking as I clutch the thick folder containing the full list of their demands. They think they've won already. They have no idea what's about to happen when the bailiff starts reading. Before I tell you what happened in that courtroom, where are you watching from today? Please hit that like button and subscribe, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you know about family. This is a story about love that came with a price tag. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I thought I had a normal childhood. My parents, Robert and Patricia Henderson, lived in a beautiful colonial house with perfectly manicured lawns. Dad worked as a regional manager for a pharmaceutical company, while Mom taught third grade at the local elementary school. From the outside, we looked like the perfect middle-class American family. But inside those walls, something else was happening that I wouldn't fully understand until much later. I remember being 7 years old when I first noticed the notebook. Mom was putting away groceries, and I was helping her organize the pantry. A small leather-bound journal fell from her purse, and when I picked it up, she quickly snatched it away. But not before I saw my name at the top of a page filled with numbers and dates. When I asked what it was, she smiled that tight smile of hers and said it was just household records, nothing for children to worry about. My younger brother Jason was born when I was 8. From the moment he arrived, the dynamics in our house shifted dramatically. While I had chores and responsibilities from an early age, Jason seemed to float through childhood untethered by any obligations. When I was 10, I was responsible for vacuuming the entire house every Saturday, doing my own laundry, and preparing simple meals when Mom worked late. Jason, at the same age, would be playing video games while Mom brought him snacks. The disparity became more obvious as we grew older. For my 13th birthday, I received a modest party at home with a homemade cake and one gift, a sweater from Target. Mom made sure to tell me it cost $47 and reminded me to take good care of it. For Jason's 13th birthday 5 years later, they rented out the local bowling alley, invited his entire class, and bought him the latest gaming console. I never heard them mention the price to him. But what really stood out was the record keeping. Everything they gave me was documented somewhere. When I needed new shoes for track practice, Mom would write something in her notebook. When they paid for my AP exam fees, Dad would mention keeping the receipts for their files. At the time, I thought maybe they were just organized people. Some parents keep photo albums, mine kept financial records. School became my escape and my salvation. I threw myself into my studies, earning straight A's and joining every academic club I could find. My teachers praised my dedication, and I won several regional science fair competitions. My parents would show up to these events taking photos and telling everyone how proud they were of their accomplished daughter. But at home, they'd remind me that my success was only possible because of their investment in my education. The notebook appeared more frequently as I got older. Sometimes I'd catch Mom updating it at the kitchen table late at night. Once when I was 16, I managed to sneak a longer look while she was in the bathroom. The entries went back years, documenting everything from my birth hospital costs to the price of my kindergarten backpack. There were categories for food, clothing, medical care, education, and something labeled miscellaneous that included things like birthday gifts and holiday presents. I asked Dad about it once, trying to sound casual. We were driving to my SAT prep class, another expense I'm sure was carefully logged. He glanced at me sideways and said that good parents keep track of investments. When I asked if they kept similar records for Jason, he changed the subject to my college applications. Northwestern University accepted me with a partial scholarship. The day the acceptance letter arrived, my parents celebrated with dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. Dad raised his glass of wine and made a toast about how their careful planning and financial sacrifice had paid off. Mom actually cried, talking about how all those years of saving and spending wisely on my education had led to this moment. Neither of them mentioned my late night studying, my sacrificed weekends, or my actual achievements. It was all about their investment finally showing returns. College in Chicago opened my eyes to a different world. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who achieved things without their parents keeping a running tally of costs. My roommate Sarah talked about her parents with genuine warmth, sharing stories of family vacations, where the focus was on making memories, not calculating expenses. My friend group included people from all economic backgrounds, and none of them seemed to carry the weight of financial obligation I felt. I majored in computer engineering, drawn to the logic and structure of code. Programming felt clean and honest in a way my family life never had. Either the code worked or it didn't. There were no hidden ledgers or emotional invoices attached. I excelled in my classes, earning internships with tech companies that paid well enough for me to start saving my own money. During my junior year, I met Marcus at a campus coffee shop. He was studying for his architecture licensing exam, spread across an entire table with his drawings and notes. When I asked if I could share the table to study, he looked up with the warmest brown eyes I'd ever seen and immediately started clearing space for me. We talked for 6 hours that first day about everything from sustainable building design to our favorite childhood books. Marcus came from a large, loving family on the South Side. His parents had immigrated from Jamaica before he was born, building a small construction business from nothing. When he talked about his family, it was with pure affection and gratitude, but without the transactional undertone I was so familiar with. His mother sent care packages not because she wanted credit for them, but because she wanted to make sure he was eating well. We dated for a year before I told my parents about him. I knew they wouldn't approve. Not because Marcus wasn't successful or ambitious, he was already working at a prestigious firm while finishing his certification. Not because he treated me poorly, he was the kindest person I'd ever known. But because he was black, and my parents, despite their liberal yard signs and diverse workplace stories, harbored prejudices they'd never admit to. The confrontation happened during Thanksgiving break my senior year. I showed them a photo of Marcus and me at a university gala. The temperature in the room dropped instantly. Mom set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. Dad's jaw tightened in that way that meant a lecture was coming. They didn't use explicit racial language. They were too sophisticated for that. Instead, they talked about cultural differences, compatibility concerns, and what the neighbors might think. They mentioned statistics about interracial relationships they'd apparently researched. They worried about future children and the challenges they might face. Every argument was wrapped in concern for my well-being, but the message was clear. Marcus was not acceptable. I pushed back for the first time in my life. I told them Marcus made me happy, that he respected and supported me in ways they never had. That's when Dad brought up the investment argument. They had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars raising me, educating me, preparing me for a certain kind of life, a life that apparently didn't include Marcus. The fight escalated over the next few months. Every phone call became a battle. They threatened to cut off my remaining college support, but I was so close to graduation and had my job offer secured that their threats felt hollow. When I announced our engagement the summer after graduation, Mom actually said the words that had probably been in that notebook all along. Everything we gave you needs to be returned if you go through with this. At the time, I thought it was just anger talking. Parents say things they don't mean when they're upset. I went ahead with my wedding plans, keeping them small and intimate. Marcus and I married at his family's church with just his relatives and our close friends in attendance. My parents didn't come. Jason texted me that day saying he was sorry, but Mom and Dad wouldn't let him attend. The silence after the wedding was deafening. No calls, no emails, nothing. I sent them photos of the ceremony, hoping to bridge the gap. The pictures came back marked return to sender. I tried calling from different numbers. They never answered. Even Jason stopped responding to my messages, though I later learned they had threatened to cut off his college funding if he maintained contact with me. Meanwhile, Marcus and I built our life together. We bought a small townhouse in Oak Park close enough to the city for our commutes, but with a yard for the family we hoped to have. I rose quickly at my tech company, leading development teams and earning promotions that came with substantial salary increases. Marcus started his own sustainable architecture practice, focusing on affordable housing projects. When Sophie was born 3 years into our marriage, I sent my parents a birth announcement. It came back unopened. When Ethan arrived 2 years later, I didn't bother trying. Marcus's family embraced our children, completely filling the grandparent role with enthusiasm and love. Sophie called Marcus's mother Nana and his father Pop Pop. They never asked for anything in return except to be part of our lives. The lawsuit arrived on a Monday morning in September. Sophie had just started preschool, and Ethan was taking his first steps. I was preparing breakfast when the doorbell rang. A process server handed me an envelope and asked me to confirm my name. The weight of those papers felt heavier than both my babies combined. Marcus found me sitting at the kitchen table, still in my pajamas, staring at the legal documents. My parents were suing me for the return of all financial investments made in my upbringing plus interest. The initial claim was for $487,000. The itemized list attached to the filing ran 23 pages. Reading through that list was like reliving my childhood through a funhouse mirror. Every birthday present was there with its retail price and date of purchase. School supplies from kindergarten through high school were meticulously documented. They had receipts for Halloween costumes, Easter baskets, and tooth fairy money. $5 for the tooth I lost in second grade with interest calculated over 25 years. There were entries I couldn't believe were real. $63 for tampons and pads from ages 13 to 18, $4,200 for food consumed during family vacations, $12 for the sex education book Mom awkwardly gave me when I was 11. They had calculated the cost of gasoline for every school drop-off and pickup, every soccer practice, every piano lesson. Marcus was furious in a way I'd never seen before. This gentle man who designed buildings to shelter people was ready to tear something down. He wanted to ignore it, to throw the papers away and pretend my parents didn't exist. But we both knew that wasn't possible. This was a real lawsuit that required a real response. Finding Jennifer Walsh was the first piece of luck in this nightmare. She was a family law attorney recommended by a colleague known for handling unusual cases. When I showed her the paperwork, she actually laughed out loud before catching herself and apologizing. In her 20 years of practice, she'd never seen anything quite like this. We spent our first meeting going through the list line by line. Jennifer took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally shaking her head or asking me to repeat something to make sure she'd heard correctly. When we got to the section about medical expenses that included charges for bandaids and children's Tylenol, she put down her pen and looked at me seriously. "This isn't really about money," she said. "This is about control and punishment. The question is, what triggered this now after 4 years of no contact?" I told her I didn't know, but she encouraged me to do some investigating. Family lawsuits like this usually had a catalyst beyond the obvious. It took some detective work, but Marcus found the answer through a mutual acquaintance who still lived in my hometown. Jason had gotten involved in cryptocurrency trading during the pandemic. He'd convinced my parents to let him invest some of their retirement savings, promising huge returns. Instead, he'd lost everything in a market crash, nearly $300,000 gone overnight. He'd then borrowed more money trying to recover the losses, digging himself deeper into debt with some questionable lenders. My parents were facing financial ruin for the first time in their lives. Their retirement plans were destroyed, and they had liens placed on their house. Someone, probably their lawyer, had suggested that recovering their investment in their ungrateful daughter might solve their problems. After all, they had kept such careful records. Jennifer and I spent the next 3 weeks building our defense. But more than that, we built an offense. If my parents wanted to treat raising a child like a business transaction, then we would examine the full ledger. I started documenting my own contributions to the family that had never been recorded in their notebook. There were the 6 months I spent caring for my paternal grandfather, when his Alzheimer's became too severe for him to live alone. I was 17, giving up my senior year activities to be his full-time caregiver while my parents worked. I calculated the going rate for round-the-clock memory care. The number was substantial. Then there were the years of unpaid labor. While Jason played, I cleaned houses, mowed lawns, and cooked meals. I calculated minimum wage for every hour spent on household chores that went beyond normal childhood responsibilities. The logs my parents kept actually helped here, as they had inadvertently documented my work schedule alongside their expenses. We found evidence of financial exploitation too. When I was 16, I had won a science fair prize of $1,000. The check was deposited into my savings account, which my mother had access to. The money disappeared a week later, withdrawn by her for home repairs. The bank still had the records. Marcus contributed his own research, diving into public records and social media. He discovered that Jason had received gifts and support that dwarfed what I had gotten, none of it documented in any ledger. Cars, vacations, electronic gadgets, and most recently, the initial stake for his cryptocurrency ventures. The disparate treatment was stark when laid out objectively. Jennifer was building a case not just for defense, but for counterclaim. If my parents wanted to use the law to collect on raising a child, then they would face the legal implications of their selective accounting. She prepared documentation on the emotional abuse inherent in their conditional love, the discrimination in their treatment of their children, and the financial fraud of taking money from my accounts. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. Sophie crawled into our bed around midnight, saying she had a bad dream. As I held her, smelling her strawberry shampoo and feeling her little heartbeat against my chest, I thought about the notebook my mother kept. Would I ever look at Sophie and calculate the cost of this moment? Would I save the receipt for that strawberry shampoo to present to her decades later? Marcus wrapped his arms around both of us, whispering that everything would be okay. His family had offered to watch the kids during the trial, treating it like any other day, where Mommy and Daddy had important work. They didn't know their other grandparents existed, and I wondered if they ever would. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, more like a large conference room than the grand halls of justice you see on television. But it was packed with spectators. Word had gotten out in my hometown about the unusual case, and people were curious. I recognized faces from my childhood neighbors, who had watched me grow up, teachers from the local schools, friends of my parents, who were about to witness something extraordinary. My parents entered with their lawyer, Mr. Davidson, a man who looked exactly like you'd expect someone named Mr. Davidson to look. Gray suit, gray hair, gray demeanor. They didn't make eye contact with me, instead, focusing on arranging their documents on the plaintiff's table. Mom was wearing her court best, the same outfit she wore to school board meetings when she wanted to appear authoritative. Dad had his reading glasses on, studying papers, as if this was just another business transaction. Judge Martinez called the court to order at exactly 9 o'clock. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with sharp eyes that suggested she'd already reviewed this case thoroughly and found it as unusual as everyone else did. She asked Mr. Davidson to present the plaintiff's case. Davidson stood and began what was clearly a well-rehearsed presentation. He talked about the sacred obligation of parental investment, how my parents had sacrificed and saved to give me every opportunity. He used words like breach of contract and implied agreement, trying to establish that by accepting my parents' support, I had entered into an unspoken agreement to maintain family harmony and respect their wishes. He presented the itemized list as evidence, emphasizing the total amount and the meticulous record-keeping that demonstrated my parents' deliberate investment strategy. $487,000 over 32 years, he repeated several times, letting the number hang in the air like an accusation. When he began reading specific items from the list, a murmur ran through the courtroom. $3 for Halloween candy in 1995. 75 cents for a pack of tissues during flu season in 1998. $4.30 for school milk money in second grade. The granular detail was both impressive and disturbing. Some people in the gallery started to shift uncomfortably. A few exchanged glances. When Davidson read the entry about charging for birthday cake ingredients, someone actually gasped. He continued, undeterred, professionally presenting each category of expense as if it was perfectly normal to bill your child for their existence. Judge Martinez maintained a neutral expression, but I saw her eyebrows rise slightly when Davidson mentioned the calculated interest rates. Apparently, my parents had charged compound interest from the date of each expense using the federal rate plus 2%. They had actually figured out interest on my kindergarten crayons. When Davidson finished, Judge Martinez asked if the plaintiffs had any additional evidence to present. That's when Mom stood up. She wanted to address the court directly to explain their position as parents who had been betrayed. Judge Martinez allowed it. Mom's voice was steady as she described their dreams for me, how they had planned my success from before I was born. She talked about the sacrifices they made, the vacations they didn't take, the clothes she didn't buy for herself. She painted a picture of parents who gave everything for an ungrateful child who threw it all away for someone unsuitable. The racial coding in her language was subtle but clear. She never said black, but she used every euphemism possible. She talked about cultural incompatibility, different values, concern for future generations. Several people in the gallery shook their heads. Judge Martinez's expression grew colder with each coded reference. When Mom finished, Jennifer stood for our defense. She was brilliant from the first word. She acknowledged that yes, my parents had kept remarkable records. In fact, she said these records would be very helpful for the court to understand the full picture of this family dynamic. She asked the bailiff to distribute copies of the complete list to everyone present. As people began reading through the full document, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The more they read, the more disturbed they became. 20 pages of charges that included items like electricity used for nightlights, water for baths, and even a calculation for the percentage of household heating oil consumed by my body heat. Jennifer then asked the court's permission to have the bailiff read selected items aloud to ensure the full record was understood. Judge Martinez agreed. The bailiff, a middle-aged man who probably thought he'd seen everything, began reading in his official voice. $1.50 for a Band-Aid in 1996, $4 for children's Tylenol in 1997, 87 cents for a pencil eraser in 2001. His voice grew increasingly incredulous as he continued. $12 for birthday wrapping paper charged to the recipient, $5 for gasoline to drive to parent-teacher conferences, $3 for the water used in a slip and slide on a hot summer day. When he reached the entry about oxygen during delivery, he actually paused and looked at the judge. She nodded for him to continue. $342 for oxygen administered during labor and delivery, August 15, 1992. The courtroom went completely silent. Someone in the back row whispered, "My God," loud enough for everyone to hear. But Jennifer wasn't done. She had the bailiff continue to the most recent entries, the ones added just before the lawsuit was filed. They had gone back and estimated costs they hadn't originally tracked. The price of reading bedtime stories calculated at minimum wage. The cost of hugs based on professional cuddling services. They had actually Googled the going rate for professional cuddlers and applied it retroactively to physical affection given during my childhood. By the time the bailiff finished reading, the entire courtroom was in a state of shocked silence. My parents' lawyer was studying his notes intently, avoiding eye contact with everyone. My parents themselves seemed smaller somehow, as if the exposure of their list to public scrutiny had physically diminished them. Jennifer began our counter-argument with a simple statement. If we are going to treat child-rearing as a business transaction, then let's examine all assets and liabilities. She presented our first piece of evidence, my grandfather's care. For 6 months in my senior year of high school, I had been my grandfather's full-time caregiver. Jennifer had obtained statements from the home health agencies in our area about their rates. Round-the-clock memory care averaged $8,000 per month. For 6 months, that would have been $48,000. She had affidavits from neighbors who witnessed my daily care from the pharmacy, that confirmed I picked up all his medications from the adult daycare center, that showed I had withdrawn him to save my parents' money. Next, she presented evidence of my unpaid labor throughout childhood. While my parents had documented their expenses, they had also inadvertently documented my work schedule. Cleaning the house every Saturday for 8 years, cooking dinner 3 nights a week from age 12, mowing lawns, shoveling snow, washing cars. Jennifer had calculated it all at the federal minimum wage for each respective year. The total came to $68,000. Then came the financial exploitation. Jennifer presented bank records showing my mother's withdrawals from my savings account. Not just the science fair money, but birthday checks from relatives, summer job earnings all deposited, and then mysteriously withdrawn within days. Total theft, because that's what it was when you took money from a minor's account, without their consent, $12,000. The emotional abuse calculation was harder to quantify, but Jennifer tried anyway. She presented research on the psychological damage of conditional love of growing up knowing your value was literally being calculated. She had a statement from my therapist about the years of treatment needed to overcome this trauma. Therapy costs at a conservative estimate $40,000. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Jason had agreed to testify. My brother, who had been forbidden to contact me for 4 years, walked into that courtroom looking like he'd aged a decade. He took the stand, and Jennifer asked him about his childhood experience compared to mine. Jason's testimony was devastating for our parents. He confirmed the disparate treatment, how he was never subjected to the same accounting I faced. He revealed that our parents had given him over $200,000 over the years, none of it documented, none of it considered a loan. Cars, vacations, business ventures, all freely given until the cryptocurrency disaster. Then Jason dropped the biggest bombshell. He testified that our parents weren't actually facing financial ruin. Yes, he had lost their money in bad investments, but they had recovered through insurance claims and legal action against his advisors. They currently had over $2 million in assets. This lawsuit wasn't about need, it was about punishment and control. He produced documents showing our parents' true financial status, bank statements, property valuations, investment accounts. They were wealthier than they'd ever been thanks to a recent inheritance from Mom's aunt that they hadn't mentioned in their filing. The lawsuit against me was purely vindictive, designed to punish me for marrying Marcus and living my own life. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Judge Martinez had to call for order multiple times. My parents' lawyer was frantically whispering with them, clearly blindsided by this information. Mom's face had gone white while Dad's was turning red. Jennifer used this moment to present her final argument. She asked the court to consider what kind of parents keep a running tally of every cent spent on their child from birth. What kind of parents charge interest on birthday presents? What kind of parents would sue their own daughter for the crime of falling in love with someone they didn't approve of based solely on race? She asked Judge Martinez to not only dismiss this case, but to consider sanctions against my parents for filing a frivolous lawsuit and hiding assets. She requested they pay all my legal fees and court costs. She also suggested the court refer this case to Child Protective Services for review, as the documentation my parents provided could constitute evidence of long-term emotional abuse. My parents' lawyer tried to salvage something from the wreckage. He argued that parents had the right to keep whatever records they wanted, that gifts given conditionally could be reclaimed if conditions weren't met. He tried to paint my parents as victims of an ungrateful child and a son who had betrayed their trust. But the damage was done. The public reading of that list, Jason's testimony, the evidence of their true wealth, it all painted a picture that couldn't be unpainted. Judge Martinez called for a brief recess to review the evidence. Those 15 minutes felt like hours. When she returned, Judge Martinez delivered her verdict with barely controlled anger. She had seen many family disputes in her courtroom, but this, she said, was exceptional in its cold calculation and cruelty. She dismissed my parents' case with prejudice, meaning they could never file it again. Furthermore, she ordered them to pay all my legal fees, court costs, and an additional $5,000 in sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit. She noted that while the law couldn't force parents to love unconditionally, it also didn't allow them to weaponize parental duty for revenge. Her final words were directed at my parents. She told them they had been given a gift in me, a daughter who succeeded despite their conditional love, who found happiness despite their disapproval. They had chosen to see that gift as an investment gone bad. The court, she said, hoped they would reflect on what they had lost, not in money, but in the relationship with their daughter and grandchildren. The gavel came down with finality. The case was over. The aftermath in the courtroom was chaos. Reporters who had gotten wind of the unusual case were trying to get statements. Neighbors and family friends were approaching my parents with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. My parents left quickly, heads down, their lawyer guiding them through the crowd. Jason caught up with me outside. We hadn't spoken in 4 years, and here we were on the courthouse steps both crying. He apologized for his silence, for not standing up to them sooner, for the cryptocurrency disaster that had triggered this whole mess. I told him none of that was his fault. We were both victims of our parents' distorted view of love. He met Marcus properly for the first time that day, shaking his hand and apologizing for our family's racism. He asked if he could meet his niece and nephew sometime. The smile on his face when I said yes was worth more than any amount our parents had calculated. The drive home felt surreal. Marcus held my hand at every red light, squeezing gently, as if to remind me this was real. It was over. We picked up the kids from his parents' house, where Sophie ran to us with drawings she'd made, and Ethan toddled over with his arms raised for a hug. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I found myself thinking about the notebook again. Somewhere in my parents' house, that leather-bound journal still existed, filled with 23 pages of itemized resentment. I wondered if they would keep adding to it, calculating the cost of the lawsuit, the sanctions, the legal fees, or if maybe finally they might close it for good. Marcus found me on our back deck looking at the stars. He brought 2 cups of tea and a blanket, wrapping us both up against the cool September air. We didn't talk for a while, just sat there processing everything that had happened. Finally, he asked me how I felt. The truth was complicated. I felt relieved that it was over, angry that it had happened at all, sad for the relationship that could never be repaired. But mostly I felt free. Free from the weight of obligation, from the mental calculating of whether I had earned my parents' love that day, from the guilt of never being a good enough investment. In the days that followed, the story spread beyond our small town. Someone had recorded portions of the trial and posted them online. The image of the bailiff reading charges for bandaids and birthday cake became viral. People shared their own stories of conditional parental love, though none quite as methodically documented as mine. I received messages from strangers who had experienced similar situations. Adult children whose parents kept mental ledgers, even if not physical ones. People who were told they owed their parents for basic care. The response was overwhelming and oddly comforting. I wasn't alone in this experience. Jennifer called a week later with unexpected news. My parents wanted to settle the sanctions and fees immediately, no payment plan needed. They also included a document stating they would make no further attempts at contact unless I initiated it. It was the closest thing to an apology they could manage, wrapped in legal language and delivered by a lawyer. Jason started visiting regularly. He and Marcus bonded over architecture and design, and he became the uncle my children deserved. He was working to rebuild his life after the cryptocurrency disaster, taking responsibility for his mistakes, while also recognizing how our parents' different treatment of us had contributed to his poor decisions. 3 months after the trial, I received an unexpected package. No return address, but I recognized Mom's handwriting. Inside was the notebook, the original leather-bound journal that had documented my childhood in dollars and cents. There was no note, no explanation, just the notebook itself. I held it for a long time, this artifact of conditional love. Every page was filled with her neat handwriting, recording expenses from my first diaper to my high school graduation. The final entry was dated the day I told them about Marcus. After that, blank pages, as if I had ceased to exist when I chose love over their approval. Marcus suggested we burn it, make some kind of cleansing ritual out of destroying this record. But I decided to keep it, not as a painful reminder, but as a teaching tool. Someday when Sophie and Ethan are older, I'll show them this notebook and explain what love shouldn't look like, how real love doesn't keep score or calculate interest rates. I started therapy to work through the trauma of transactional parenting. My therapist helped me understand that my parents' behavior wasn't about me at all. It was about their own fears, their need for control, their inability to love without conditions. The notebook was their security blanket, proof that they had done their parental duty, even if they couldn't do parental love. The impact on my own parenting has been profound. I catch myself sometimes wanting to remind Sophie about something I've done for her, wanting that acknowledgement and gratitude. But then I remember the notebook, remember the weight of documented obligation. And I stop myself. My children don't owe me anything for their existence. We create new traditions in our family. Sunday dinners at Marcus's parents' house where no one mentions the price of food. Birthday parties where the only thing that matters is joy, not the cost of cake. Holiday gatherings filled with laughter and stories, not calculations and record keeping. A year after the trial, something unexpected happened. I was promoted to Chief Technology Officer at my company, making me one of the youngest CTOs in the industry. The announcement made business news, and my picture was in several trade publications. I wondered if my parents saw it, if they calculated what percentage of my success they could claim credit for. Jason told me later that they had seen it. He was having monthly dinners with them, trying to maintain some relationship despite everything. He said Mom had cut out one of the articles and put it in a folder, not the notebook, but a regular folder where she kept important papers. It was progress, maybe, or maybe just another form of accounting. The real test came when Ethan got seriously ill with pneumonia and had to be hospitalized. It was the scariest week of our lives, watching our baby struggle to breathe hooked up to machines and IVs. The medical bills were substantial, even with good insurance. At no point did I think about keeping track of the cost to present to him later. During that terrifying week, I thought about calling my parents. They were still his grandparents, even if they'd never met him. But I didn't. The price of their involvement would be too high, not in dollars, but in the emotional toll of letting them back into our lives with their conditional love and careful accounting. Ethan recovered fully, and life continued. Sophie started kindergarten at a wonderful school where they emphasized emotional intelligence alongside academics. Ethan became obsessed with dinosaurs, and our house filled with books and toys about prehistoric creatures. We didn't keep receipts. 2 years after the trial, I established a foundation for young adults estranged from their families due to conditional love racism or other forms of rejection. The foundation provides emergency funds, therapy resources, and legal aid for those facing situations similar to mine. We've helped dozens of young people in our first year alone. The foundation's name is Simple Love, because that's what every child deserves: love without invoices, without interest rates, without conditions. The logo is a heart with no price tag attached. Our mission statement is simple too. Every child deserves to be loved for who they are, not for their return on investment. At our first fundraising gala, I told our story publicly for the first time. The entire ballroom was silent as I described the notebook, the lawsuit, the bailiff reading charges for oxygen during my birth. When I finished, the standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. We raised more money that night than we had projected for the entire year. Marcus designed our foundation's offices pro bono, creating a warm, welcoming space for young people who had been rejected by their families. There's a wall where people can share their stories anonymously if they prefer. The messages range from heartbreaking to hopeful, all testament to the resilience of those who choose to build their own families when biological ones fail them. Sometimes I dream about reconciliation with my parents. In these dreams, they show up at our door without ledgers or lawyers, just as grandparents wanting to know their grandchildren. They apologize without calculating the cost of their words. We have dinner together without anyone keeping track of who pays. But then I wake up and remember who they really are. People so afraid of being taken advantage of that they turned parenthood into a business transaction. People who saw their own children as investments rather than individuals. People who could document every penny spent, but couldn't calculate the value of unconditional love. The truth is, they did give me something valuable with all their careful accounting. They taught me exactly what kind of parent I never want to be. Every entry in that notebook is a lesson in what not to do. Every calculated charge is a reminder that love shouldn't come with a receipt. Sophie is 7 now, the same age I was when I first saw the notebook. Sometimes I watch her playing carefree and confident, secure in the knowledge that she is loved just for being herself. She doesn't know that some grandparents charge interest on birthday presents. She doesn't know that some parents keep running tallies of devotion. Last week, she broke an expensive vase while playing indoor soccer despite being told not to. As I cleaned up the pieces, she tearfully asked if I was going to make her pay for it from her piggy bank. The question stopped me cold. I knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and told her that accidents happen, that things can be replaced, but she cannot, that my love for her isn't affected by broken vases or anything else. She hugged me, then fiercely, with the pure trust of a child who has never had to earn affection. In that moment, I thought about my parents, probably at home, with their notebooks and spreadsheets, their careful documentation of every transaction. I wondered if they ever experienced moments like this, moments where love is so simple and clean that it needs no documentation. The notebook still sits in my office drawer, a relic from another life. Sometimes new employees or volunteers at the foundation ask about our origin story, and I pull it out to show them. The pages have yellowed slightly, the ink fading in places, but the message remains clear. This is what happens when love comes with conditions. This is why our work matters. Marcus and I are building something different for our children, a legacy of unconditional love of support without strings of presents, without price tags. We're not perfect parents by any means. We make mistakes, lose our tempers, sometimes forget school events. But our children will never wonder if they've earned enough points for our love that day. Jason got married last year to a wonderful woman named Priya, who understands our complicated family history. At their wedding, our parents sat in the front row, having paid for much of the celebration. I wondered if they were keeping track of expenses, if somewhere there was a new notebook with Jason's wedding costs carefully documented. We didn't attend the wedding, though, Jason understood. He and Priya visited us the next week, bringing cake and photos, sharing the joy without the complications. He told me our parents had asked about me, about the grandchildren they'd never met. He didn't tell them much, protecting our privacy while maintaining his own fragile relationship with them. Sometimes strangers who have heard our story ask if I forgive my parents. The answer is complicated. I forgive them in the sense that I don't carry active anger anymore. The fury that once consumed me has mellowed into something more like pity. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean handing them a clean slate to fill with new calculations. I think about the path that led them to that courtroom, suing their own daughter for the cost of raising her. What fears and insecurities drove them to document every bandaid, every birthday cake, every drop of gasoline? What made them see parental love as a loan rather than a gift? These are questions I'll never have answers to. And perhaps that's for the best. The impact of our story continues to ripple outward. I get letters from parents who say it made them reconsider their own expectations of their children. Adult children write to say it gave them courage to set boundaries with transactional parents. Therapists have told me they use our story as a case study in sessions about family dysfunction and financial abuse. We're planning to expand the foundation nationally next year. There are so many young people out there carrying the weight of parental invoices, literal or figurative. They need to know they're not alone, that their worth isn't measured in their ability to repay their parents' investment. They need resources and support to build lives free from that burden. Ethan asked me recently why he doesn't have another set of grandparents like some of his friends. I told him an age-appropriate version of the truth, that sometimes families disagree about important things and need space from each other. He accepted this with the easy understanding of a 5-year-old, then asked if we could have ice cream. The simplicity of childhood, uncomplicated by adult calculations. Looking back at that day in court, I realize it was both an ending and a beginning. The end of any possibility of normal relationship with my parents, but the beginning of my true freedom from their ledger. The bailiff reading that list didn't just expose their cruelty, it broke the spell they had held over me since childhood. Would I do it all differently if I could? Would I have tried harder to meet their expectations, married someone they approved of, lived the life they had invested in? The answer is no, because that life would have come at the cost of my authentic self, and no amount of parental investment is worth that price. Marcus and I sometimes joke darkly about sending our parents an invoice for missing their grandchildren's childhoods. We could itemize every missed birthday, every absent Christmas, every milestone they chose their ledger over. But we don't, because we're not them. We don't weaponize love or monetize relationships. The greatest irony is that my parents' meticulous record-keeping, their careful documentation of every expense, became the very thing that exposed them. Their own evidence, meant to prove their case, instead revealed the poverty of their love. They kept such careful track of what they gave, but never noticed what they withheld. As I finish writing this story, Sophie is doing homework at the kitchen table, while Ethan builds a block tower in the living room. Marcus is cooking dinner, filling our home with the smell of his grandmother's curry recipe. This is wealth that can't be calculated in any notebook. This is return on investment that can't be measured in dollars. My parents are presumably still out there, perhaps maintaining new ledgers or reviewing old ones. Maybe they've calculated the cost of their lawsuit, added up the sanctions and legal fees, tried to determine if it was worth it. But they'll never be able to calculate what they truly lost. Because how do you put a price on your grandchildren's laughter? How do you calculate the value of forgiveness never sought, or redemption never attempted? For anyone reading this who grew up with transactional parents, who felt the weight of every dollar spent on their behalf, who knew their value was being constantly calculated, I want you to know something important. You don't owe anyone for your existence. You don't need to earn the love you should have received freely. Your worth isn't measured by your return on investment. And for parents who might recognize themselves in this story, who keep mental or physical ledgers of what you've given your children, I challenge you to consider what you're really tracking. Is it love, or is it control? Is it generosity, or is it manipulation? Because children aren't investments. They're not stocks or bonds or savings accounts. They're human beings who deserve love without invoices. The notebook taught me many things, but the most important lesson was this: real love doesn't keep score. It doesn't calculate interest rates or demand repayment. Real love is given freely without expectation of return. It's as simple as a child's hug, as pure as a baby's trust, as unconditional as it is unconditional. That's the legacy I'm building for Sophie and Ethan. Not a notebook full of expenses, but a heart full of memories. Not a calculation of costs, but a celebration of moments. Not an invoice for their childhood, but an investment in their happiness. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is love without a price tag. If my story resonates with you, if you felt the weight of parental accounting, or know someone who has, I encourage you to share this. Comment below about your own experiences with conditional versus unconditional love. How do you break the cycle? How do you love without keeping score? Please like this video if it touched you, subscribe for more stories of resilience and redemption, and share it with anyone who needs to hear that they are worthy of love without conditions. Thank you for listening to my story, for witnessing my journey from debt to freedom. May you all find the unconditional love you deserve, whether from the family you were born into or the family you choose to create. Remember, you don't owe anyone for your existence. You are worthy of love simply because you are.